So Doug will be delivering a Pathways project titled Researching and Presenting. It is going to be a 5 to 7 minute speech. The title of his speech is Pitch Perfect, Music and Beyond. Everyone, please give a big round of applause to Doug Crocker.
Thank you, Trevor, and fellow Toastmasters and guests. It is actually perfect pitch, music and beyond. And I will put references in the chat so that I don't have to cloud up my speech with the references. Perfect pitch is, or absolute pitch, is the ability to identify a pitch of a given tone without an external reference. I learned of this phenomenon in my 20s while I was studying music theory, and I was dismayed a bit to realize that I didn't have it. I was relieved to learn that I really didn't need it. After all, none of the Beatles had perfect pitch, so who needs it? Conventional understanding of perfect pitch is that it cannot be learned. You are either born with it or you're not. And only 1 to 5 people, 1 to 5 in 10,000 people possess it, supposedly. But over the years in dabbling with music and also taking an interest in neuroscience along the way, I began to think that there's more to understand about perfect pitch, and there is. To start, there are disadvantages as well as advantages to perfect pitch. Advantages should be obvious, that you readily internalize and integrate music theory with your tonal experience, and that you can communicate efficiently with other musicians. Disadvantages, basically, I would summarize as being the internal noise, cognitive noise, that results from that involuntary association of musical language. But the biggest disadvantage is that most people who have perfect pitch lose it with age, and not only lose it, but their perception of pitch shifts by a semitone or more, and that could be very disruptive to a musician. There are degrees of perfect pitch. Sometimes there can be a learned perfect, something of a pseudo-learned perfect pitch around the timbre of a given instrument that a musician is familiar with. And pitches that they've heard very often in that certain timbre. It may be possible to learn perfect pitch. University of Chicago psychologists claim that they've been able to train adults to have perfect pitch and to even retune the perception of pitch in those who have perfect pitch. This kind of fits with my own experience of being able to concentrate to a certain level and get pretty close and guess, or I guess it's an educated guess, through concentration with pretty accurately a pitch or a key of a song without having to hear a reference. Perfect pitch occurs more frequently in musicians. It occurs more frequently in musicians, but there's no reliable test for perfect pitch in musically untrained persons. So it makes me wonder if how they arrive at 1 in 10,000, 1 to 5 persons in 10,000 have perfect pitch if they have no reliable test for non-musicians. Anyway, it appears to run in families, suggesting it's hereditary. And this is where it gets more interesting for beyond music, for perfect pitch beyond music. It's much more frequent in tonal-oriented languages, such as Mandarin and Vietnamese. A study in Scientific American found that students who started studying music between 4 and 5 years old in Beijing and in America, of those, 60% of the Beijing students had perfect pitch, compared to 14% of Americans. Seeing some of these things about perfect pitch, I began to, or seeing that the characteristic of an augmented and abnormal perception made me think of another phenomenon that I became familiar with a few years ago called synesthesis. And I learned about this through a book, a fantastic little book called A Brief Tour of Human Consciousness by B.S. Ramachandran. Probably mispronounced that. But synesthesis is an abnormal condition where the perception in one sense triggers an involuntary perception in another sense. For example, someone will hear a certain tone and think of a color, or they'll actually see a number, a certain number in a color, and another number in a different color. Strange. About 1 in 4 persons have synesthesis, but it's common among musicians, writers, and artists. Another thing interesting beyond music is that perfect pitch occurs very often, or more frequent, in autism. And researchers of autism are excited about this because they believe that the unusual capabilities of autistic people associated with music may lead to some therapies. In closing, I want to say that I'm satisfied with my own inferior pitch perception, but I'm fascinated with the relationship between music, the brain, and the mind. Thank you.